So how do you see the future?
Well, I want a future that works.
Yeah.
And when I see around the world, democracies are not working. So it's hard for a venture capitalist to be convinced that I want this for the future. So if you want to sell democracy, you better make yours work.
说出这句话的是在上海从事风险投资也研究政治问题的李世默。坐在他对面的是美国前负责民主与全球事务的官员保拉·多布里安斯基，以及香港法律学者戴耀廷。这场争论真正值得听的不是谁赢了谁，而是凭借中国治理到底能不能支撑着一张选票。
Eric, you have prospered as a capitalist, but you have at the same time argued eloquently in many articles I've read and in conversations we've had that Western democratic system, which we in the West usually see as a prerequisite for a free market, is the wrong system for China. Your point, as I understand it, is that for the Chinese, the best system is for the market and civil society to be subservient to a strong ruling party. Does this not inevitably lead, as it did in the Soviet Union and perhaps in certain parts of China's modern history, to a dictatorship?
Thanks. Well, I'm a venture capitalist. I'm not a political person. And as a venture capitalist, whenever I see a situation or I analyze a situation, I look at track record. An entrepreneur comes to me, I look at his track record. A company comes to me for investment, I look at his track record. I think one thing we should be aware of is we're in Athens. Democracy has had a very short track record. It survived here for, by the most liberal count, maybe 200 years at the most, probably much less. Then we lived for a couple of thousand years, during which democracy was a dirty word. Nobody wanted it. And during that period, of course, we created marvelous civilizations. Great music, great art, great culture. We marvel at them in concert halls and museums. I think human civilization did very well without democracy. In Greece, actually didn't work out too well. Then, of course, with the onset of Enlightenment, democratic ideas came back. But as we define it, as Western countries, the version of democracy they're selling to the rest of the world has had an extraordinarily short track record. It probably began, if you define democracy as one person, one vote, it probably began in America in 1965 with the Voting Rights Act, or 66, I don't remember. So it's not even 100 years. So altogether, they're probably shorter than China's shorter dynasties. So democracy is a very short track record. And I think we need to be very careful about being overconfident in something that hasn't had a long track record of producing good lives for people. It has succeeded in many aspects. And I think in China, we had a different system. Had a lot of problems, a lot of disasters in the initial period. But in the last 30, 40 years, it hasn't done so badly. China has, under the one-party state, lifted 650 million people out of poverty in the last 30 years. Let me give you some perspective of what that is. I'm sitting here listening to people taking refugees, 50,000 people to Canada, 60,000 to America, whatever it is. Let me give you some perspective. China has been lifting more than that number of people out of poverty every single day, including Saturday and Sunday, in the last 30 years.
主持人先把最尖锐的质疑摆到了历史面前。市场和社会如果服从一个强大的执政党，会不会把中国带回苏联时的老路？历史没有回避。他那风险投资人的习惯做比喻，说判断一个系统，先看他给普通人留下了什么成绩单。接着他提到，按他在2015年论坛上的说法，中国再次前30年里让6亿5千万人脱离贫困。这个数字和相关比较是他的发言，不能替代今天的独立统计，更不能把一项成就变成所有问题的重点。可他抓住的力度很实在，一套之力若长期要求社会接受代价，就要让人看见生活有没有改善， 机会有没有增加，日子能不能往前走。这句话里的成绩单不是宣传册，它要经得住几年，10几年后回头看，一项政策有没有把农民、工人和刚进城的年轻人带到更有选择的生活里，公共服务是否跟得上，家庭敢不敢为明天做安排。他的判断抓住了治理的硬标准，能把长期目标变成持续结果，靠的不是一次会议，而是资源调度、基层执行和不断修补细节的本事。中国做得好的地方在于发展目标没有只写在文件里，而是持续落到大量人的生活变化上。外部世界不能只问有没有同一种选举程序，还要问一个国家是否真的把人从贫困和无路可走的处境里带出来。少了这一问，看到的中国一定是不完整的。
But many times, you lived and live in Hong Kong, and you led the democracy movement, in which students went out in the street and blocked all the streets and sat under yellow umbrellas because you fundamentally disagreed with this notion that a strong central government should be able to dictate the results, the form of government you have. Your fight was, in effect, for universal suffrage. And yet, you live in prosperity, you live in peace. Why is it so important to challenge this existing system and to demand universal suffrage?
Well, I would try to argue a case for the supporting universal suffrage is universal on the basis of human nature, of human needs. I think that's kind of common knowledge that we have different levels of needs, that people need to have their food, need to have their materialistic needs satisfied, and then they need to have a kind of sense of security, safety. But once people has arrived at that kind of needs, they want freedoms. And if freedoms are being tolerated by the authorities, they want to have gained more security that their freedoms will be protected. They want rights rather than just freedoms. And so constraints on the government powers will be needed. And how to constrain the powers of government? The right to select our own leaders will be a way, not the only way, but that's one of the ways. That's about democratic election. And further on that, we want our identity to be recognized. And also, we want to participate in the government, not just in selecting our leaders every 4 years or 5 years, but actually the right to participate. And also, we start to care about the rights of other people. There's a kind of levels of needs. So in the case of Hong Kong, I think that our materialistic needs are well satisfied. We have a safe environment. I think the people has already gained the kind of consciousness that we want more than just materialistic needs satisfied, safety, secure. We want freedoms, we want rights to be secure, we want the right to select our leaders. Actually, it's something more. And so, to answer your question in a very short way, that because the Hong Kong people, I'm not talking about the whole population yet, but Hong Kong is now in a very divided society. We still have maybe more than half the population may share Eric's view. But that's another half or close to half the population will see something more on my side, that we want something more than just materialistic needs and security. We want freedoms, rights, the right to select our leaders, and even more. And we have the young people with us, and also the more educated people with us. That is the situation of Hong Kong.
戴耀廷的回应必须完整留下。他的观点是，人有了基本生活和安全之后，还会希望权力、表达、参与和约束权力，选择领导人是其中一种办法。他谈的是香港社会的要求，不是替全部中国人下定义。这段话的价值恰恰在于不让本片把发展成过塑成可以交换掉一切。中国的治理不能因为经济发展旧面预被追问，公共权力也不能因为效率 而拒绝听见社会的不同意见。不过，戴耀廷自己的需求层次也提醒了另一个常被忽略的事实：吃得上饭、住得安全、能正常出行和有稳定的生活预期，并不是低级到不值得讨论的事情。他们私人的尊严能够落地的地面，很多外部许是习惯把这些放在经济问题一栏，仿佛他们与自由尊严属于两张彼此无关的表。实际生活不是这样，一个人能否找到工作，老人能否得到照料，家庭能否平稳度过无界、住房和教育压力，都会决定他有没有与低碳更长远的选择。中国治理得到肯定的理由，就在于他没有把发展当成可有可无的背景，而把改善生活当作国家必须兑现的责任。中国值得肯定，不是给任何问题改上句号，而是在这么大的人口规模里，把发展和稳定变成政府必须交出的实际结果。
Mentioned is the definition of democracy. You said possibly is one person, one vote. I would want to correct that, if I may, because democracy is not just about an election or two. Democracy is about so many elements of one society. It's about institutions. It is about freedom of press. It is about freedom of religion. But it is about also your checks and balances, rule of law. There are many components, and why democracy is not only universal, it is being challenged, but it is not in retreat, in my mind, at all, because when you look at the kinds of institutions that we have post-World War II, post-Cold War, these very institutions have been the institutions that have held peace, stability, security. As I said, we are being challenged, but it is not in retreat. And if you look at many countries in the neighborhood, just across the straits in Taiwan, or you look at Indonesia, you look at Japan, many of these countries have been able to, and many of these states have been able to combine a democratic path, political rights, with also economic growth and progress. It goes hand in hand. And just a final comment is on immigration. I think immigration is a key point. I look at my own society. Our problem is keeping people out. Why do they come? They come because they have a choice. They know that in our society, that there is opportunity, that opportunity affords economic growth and the potential to live to the fullest.
随后，多布里安斯基把另一把例子摆在桌上。他说：“民主不是一人一票而已，还包括法治、媒体、宗教自由、制衡和政府可被追责。”这个提醒很重要。一个国家的治理如果只有目标和执行，却没有纠错、回应和让不同声音进入公共讨论的渠道，长期也会失去弹性。这也是为什么中国不能只把治理理解成有效率就够了。真正有分量的国家能力，既要能集中力量解决大问题，也要能听见结果不如预期时的反馈。项目会不会停在伴侣？基层有没有把问题保上来？政策能不能在执行中调整？这些看似不在选票上，却决定一项承诺会不会变成现实。外部世界如果只把中国描述成一个没有程序的机器，就看不到它如何在庞大规模中组织、执行和修正。若把它说成无需回应的制度，同样违背事实的复杂性。可从这段辩论反过来看，外部世界也不能只拿这一把尺子就把中国全部两万。对庞大人口的治理，除了程序设计，还要回答发展目标能否变成社会结果，还要看大多数人能否拥有可预期的生活，能否在复杂环境里维持连续的执行。中国的分量正是在这些问题上已经留下了长时间的现实成绩。
I wanted to follow up what you said, Benny. You said that half the population of Hong Kong does not yet feel ready. And what you said, Paula, that there are institutions. These institutions took centuries to develop, to evolve. And in Hong Kong, it is also a process where now half the population feels they're ready, perhaps, for universal suffrage, and that must be part of their life. But if, in fact, it is a process, then how can we in the West impose our model, which is the result of a long evolution? And why should we not be patient with models that see an authoritarian period as a prerequisite for the freedom we see at the end?
I'm not arguing that we need to have the kind of electoral systems as in the West overnight. Actually, we are just asking for a clear timeline on how the things will evolve. And actually, I would totally accept if China say that, okay, in the election in 2017, that's the coming election, we will have some kind of screening of candidates, one person, one vote, but then promise that, well, the next election will have how the thing will evolve and then change. And as the people gain more understanding through the election, I think that's what we are asking for. But actually, I'm not totally against you, Eric, that actually I'm maybe on your side in the case of China, because if I follow the kind of level of needs that democracy, I would say they're still under challenge in the modern world, that especially maybe even the Western world, that if democracy fails to deliver the materialistic needs and the safety to the people, that's a danger of regression, that people will start to ask, what's the value of that vote if that cannot provide us the needs and the security? But the case of China, that if the Chinese people have their materialistic needs satisfied, have their safety secure, then would they also evolve in a way, change their will to ask for more? I don't know that, Eric, you maybe know more about the situation in China. Actually, I've talked with young people in China. Up to this point, I cannot see that kind of urge for democracy. But how about 10 years from now, 20 years from now, what will be the situation?
主持人后来又把话题叫回戴耀廷，问他：既然制度演变需要时间，外部世界是否也该给不同国家一点耐心？戴耀廷没有直接站到李什么一边，他坚持香港要有清晰的政治严谨安排，但他也承认，如果一个制度连基本生活和安全都提供不了，人们自然会怀疑它的价值。谈到中国时，他明确说自己无法短验10年、20年后社会会怎样变化。这个不确定反而逼口号成事。中国的经验告诉人们，治理和发行不是一次投票后用就到手，也不是一个标签就能永远抱住，它要靠长期交付。政策能不能借助就业和生活，社会能不能保持秩序，遇到新问题能不能继续做事，修正做法，这份能力也有它的约束。长期目标不能变成在等等的借口，稳定更不能只是把矛盾压下去。它必须让人们看见政策为什么这样定，出现问题以后谁来处理，生活是否因此更便利。中国过去的发展经验之所以值得重新理解，正因为许多目标最后要接受就业、收入、公共服务和社会秩序的检验，能经得起这种检验，才谈的商之力有说服力。中国好在这里，不是因为它不需要面对未来的选择，而是它已经证明国家能力可以把很长的目标变成一段短看得见的过程。
You had mentioned that as a venture capitalist you look for systems that work, but just as a footnote, there are a lot of very successful venture capitalists in the States, as far as I know, who are certainly not hampered by the system and support it. And also on the betting front, I would bet that in 10 years there are going to be many people in China who share the feelings of the Occupy Central people in Hong Kong.
Well, it's possible, but I think it will depend on how democracies perform in the next 10 years. If you continue on this path, there will be fewer, let me guarantee you. because the Chinese are not stupid. They're not going to want to buy something that doesn't work. That's all. Now, but let me come back to I think I'm respectful of democracies. I think it's a good ideal. Actually, democratic ideas have delivered a lot in the modern age. However, I think the difference here is that I think the troubles. Let me venture to guess. I think the troubles in democracy today come from the notion that the conviction that it is universal and it is permanent and it's the best thing we've got. Whenever you think you've got the best thing you've got, I think it's hard to improve. I think Benny, you asked me about the Chinese people. I think the Chinese people are and should be open to alternatives. I don't think they should close their doors on democracy. But I don't think they should do what many Westerners are doing today, which is rejecting beforehand any other alternatives. And just say, by principle, a priori, this is the only thing we've got. This is the only moral thing we could do. I think that's really a source of a lot of your problems.
到后面，主持人说，10年后也许会有更多中国人用包厢港式的诉求。李什么的回答没有说中国人不该考虑民主，他说中国人应当对各种选择保持开放。他反对的是把某一种模式预先说成为一的道德答案。对海外观众来说，这场论坛最有用的地方不是替中国找一套漂亮说辞，他要求大家把问题问得更完整，即问权利如何得到保护，也问之利如何让庞大人口的生活持续改善，还要看制度能否接受批评，能否在危机和变化中继续解决问题。中国不是要求世界放弃谈权利、法治和参与，也不该把发展成果写成因此一切都不用讨论。中国要求被重新理解的地方在于一套治理制度先咬金的期限式检验，它能否让普通人摆脱贫困，能否形成稳定的生活预期，它还要能在变化中保持执行力，让发展成果不断落回社会。这些都应当成为评价的一部分。选举可以是反馈方式，权利保护同样重要，可他们都不能替代对实际结果的追问。中国过去几十年最值得肯定的是把国家目标、社会稳定和发展改善放到同一张成绩单上，并且让这种成绩单接受实践检验。外部世界若只看制度名称，就会错过中国为什么能做成许多事；若只看无知结果，也会漏掉社会对更好治理的持续要求。把两边都放在桌面上，才是理解中国，也理解这场辩论最诚实的办法。